Hello and welcome back to the channel. I have been ordered today to talk about Cutty Sark. Yet, to my mind, it makes absolutely no sense to sit on the channel and repeat to you the things that you can read yourselves either in Wikipedia or somewhere else about the ship. So let's look a little bit at the bigger picture here. Rather than just the individual vessel, let's talk a little bit about the development of clippers and specifically Cutty Sark, how she fits into this group of clippers. This is a topic that, as a matter of fact, I used to find quite exciting when I was very young. I even had a plastic model of Cutty Sark. Heaven alone knows who the manufacturer was. That's in the pre-dawn of history. Dinosaurs were still walking the earth when I had it, but I did like rather the shape of the vessel, so at the time I was enthusiastic. As time passed, I moved to other aspects. One of the, I would say, misconceptions is that somehow the clipper ship is the highest achievement, it is the most developed form of the sailing ship. That, of course, is not really sensu stricto true. Because a ship is not Guinness record-breaking invention. A ship is designed to do a specific purpose. This is not a pleasure yacht, this is a working object, a working item. So, as a matter of fact, the frigate was the epitome of the fast-sailing cruising ship under sail. The ship of the line, the 74, was the highest development of this specific type of vessel, and on the examples go. So my point is that it is naive and inaccurate to describe the clipper ship as the ultimate development of the sailing ship, because this ignores, as a matter of fact, the further step, the so-called windjammers, the steel ships, the barks and the full-rigged ships of 3, 4 to 5 masts that became the norm in the later 19th century and in the early 20th century. These vessels were of equal great beauty, they were equally well adapted to the purpose, so they truly were the highest development within their sphere. They carried around the world cargoes that no clipper could ever dream of being able to carry, and as a matter of fact, their top speeds were not much below those of the clipper ships. Rightly or wrongly, however, we do all enthusiastically admire the look of a clipper ship. It has to be said, however, that if you take her out of the water, the vessel is actually ugly. She has a huge hull, deep, sharp, fairly sharp, yes, absolutely, but does not have the grace of the 18th century frigate or even more the warships of the 17th century. So, taken out of her context, she's unimpressive. She becomes quite impressive, however, when you see her under full sail, with the low freeboard, because she's carrying that much cargo, with the clouds of sail, and I suppose this is how people really mostly think about them. So how did they come about? Well, obviously fast-sailing ships have always been in demand for specific routes, for specific cargoes. By the end of the 18th century and the beginning of the 19th century, there was a definite urge towards faster vessels. Some of them were developments of the pilot vessels, some of them were obviously developed for smuggling or privateering, which in the 17th century was called capper or cappering. So that is what, in other words, developing a fast sailing ship was not a new idea. When after all, there is also the Chapelle's book of collection, fast-sailing vessels. So this was not a new idea. As time progressed, the speed of a vessel for specific trades became more and more important. And yes, usually this was in connection with nefarious trades. The famous Baltimore clippers, which were initially known as pilot vessels, but by the 1830s, the 1840s, they really became among the fastest vessels, but they also gained a rather unpleasant reputation, because after all, they were the ones that were used to smuggle slaves from West Africa. The premium was by this stage on speed over capacity, for the very simple reason that the Royal Navy had deployed in force to crush the slave trade. Nominally, the United States Navy was participating also, but the bulk of the fight fell on the shoulders of the Royal Navy. So that is how we obtained the Baltimore Clipper vessels, though the majority of these vessels were schooner rigged. There were some brigs among them, and there were one or two known three-masters that may possibly claim the clipper status. The real clipper ship, what we nowadays believe to be a clipper ship, actually is a development of the final years of the 1840s, when the American shipwright or ship designer Griffiths designed the famous Rainbow. And conventional wisdom, of course, at the time questioned his idea of building a vessel with such sharp lines in the bow. It was one of the earliest, if not the earliest, vessel that had, rather than the full apple-shaped convex bow, it actually had concave water lines in the bow. Many argue that she will never float, but she did float. And as a matter of fact, she became extremely fast. So the question, of course, that arises is the Rainbow a descendant of the Baltimore Clippers, or is it a descendant of the packet ships? Personally, I fall into the second category. I think that these vessels are more development of the fast-sailing packet ship, which emerged after the end of the Napoleonic Wars and the War of 1812, and they started sailing on specific schedules across the North Atlantic. They were powerful, they were fast, they could carry ships, but the next stage in this development were the very sharp-lined and very fast clippers. It is an American invention, there is no question about it. And the American clipper ships were huge. The largest amount were well over 2,000 tons. Obviously, Donald Mackay was one of the most famous, but he was not the only one who built these vessels. No need to recall all the records of American clipper ships. It is sufficient to say that they were developed for a specific market. The vessel would leave the East Coast, usually New York, turn around Cape Horn, enter the Pacific, and race all the way up to San Francisco. They became very urgent markets right around the gold fever in California. So most of these vessels were transporting people as well as cargoes. The era of the American clipper ship was fairly short. Two things happened to sink it. First of all, obviously the demand for them disappeared to a large extent. Second, many of these vessels actually had very short lifespans, 7-10 years, and they were completely worn out. Some were wrecked, and then of course began the American Civil War, which for all practical purposes destroyed the American Merchant Marine. It would not be until the 20th century that the American Merchant Marine would really recover from the disaster of the Civil War. Meanwhile, in the late 50s and the 60s, for completely different markets, the British started also playing with fast-sailing ships. In their case, however, the market was the trade with China, the trade with India, and back to Europe. That, to some extent, explains why the British ships were much smaller than the Americans. The average clipper ship, British clipper ship, was around 900 to 1,000 tons versus the 2.5 tons of the American vessels. It is hard to tell which the two were really faster. I'm not aware of any close race between an American and a British clipper. Gradually, however, the British moved away from the all-wooden construction, partially because, let's not forget that in this period, Great Britain is the economically and technologically most developed country in the world. Their iron production, their capacity, their engineering was way ahead of any of the competition. Part of it, of course, was the lack of sufficient timber material, which was never an issue in the United States. So gradually two developments emerged. The first one was a shift. As early as the 1850s, attempts were made to make entirely iron ships. Most of the merchants, however, disapproved of them, especially for the tea trade, because it was believed that the iron ship sweats, which I can see the point, it does, and that this sweating changed the taste of the tea, which after all was the main cargo in this period. So a compromise between the two versions was to build a skeleton, the entire framework to be made out of iron, but to be covered, to be planked with wood. And this type of construction, the composite construction, the only surviving example, of course, is Cutty Sark herself. And she not only survived the horrors of Cape Horn and numerous other accidents to which she was rather prone during her lifetime, it must be said. But even more importantly, she survived the 20th century, and in the early 2000s, she survived a major fire. Luckily, the fire sprang during her reconstruction when all the timber was removed from her. So the damage was limited to parts of the frame that so-and-so needed to be replaced and repaired. It could have been far worse than this. The vessel had, I did say that she was prone to accidents, and that is true. Partially probably because at the time of the construction, the owner, Willis, kept on pushing the shipwrights to complete her much as fast as is humanly possible. Ultimately, this brought the company to a bankruptcy. That may have been the reason why she seemed to have, especially in her early voyages, to have way too many disasters, including losing her rudder. But on the other hand, she was a rather lucky vessel. Not only was she commanded by outstanding men, but despite the fact that the tea market was lost gradually to the sailing ship due to the opening of the Suez Canal in 69, and if you remember, in 1869 when Cutty Sark was launched, this was the year of the opening of the Suez Canal. So although people could complain that tea does not taste the same way when it is transported by a steamboat as it does when it is transported by a real ship, I meant sailing ship, pardon me. But the truth of the matter is that the Suez Canal cut the voyage dramatically, more than half. So clipper ships had to move to different markets. And it is perhaps ironic that the most famous of these tea clipper ships, Cutty Sark, actually gained her reputation for fast sailing and did her best runs not on the tea trade route at all, but when her owners shifted their focus to the wool trade with Australia. And it was on this run that she proved to be particularly fast and well adapted. It may be because of her distinct stern, which was created rather powerful buttock lines, and that allowed the ship to run very fast and continue carrying sail when narrower sterns may have been forced to shorten sail down in the roaring 40s. Be this as it may, she was quite successful on this run. Eventually, she was sold to the Portuguese, where she was renamed Ferreira, but In truth, her crews continued to call her always Cutty Sark. And of course, all of us are well aware where the name came from. I will not address this at all. The final act of truly good fortune for the ship was that one beautiful day, a gentleman who had sailed on her, Captain Dowman, invested heavily in buying the vessel. He recognized her, bought her, and spent significant portion of his fortune restoring her back to her glorious days. His idea was that the ship will serve as a sailing training vessel, but that was never realized. Eventually she was put in dry dock in Greenwich, where she stands to the present day. Now there are those of us who question the new way the ship is displayed. I can understand the need for this new design. I'm sure that it benefited architects, investors, and God knows who else. But I have to say that I prefer the old way of displaying the vessel. Then you could actually see the whole ship clearly. Now it is practically impossible because she's encased in this idiotic, beautifully modern glass structure that surrounds her from everywhere. It is fantastic to be sitting and drinking your coffee or tea or whatever is your particular poison right under her keel. But how much does this really allow you to fantasize and see the ship at sea, as she would have been at sea? Yes, you can argue, of course, that being in the middle of a concrete dry dock is not necessarily how she would have been at sea, but there at least you were viewing the vessel at the same level at which you would be viewing her if she was afloat. So to me, at least, it was much more personal, much more pleasant experience of seeing the vessel. But of course, dear old Kroum, there is a reason why he's an archaeologist and not, let's say, space shuttle designer. And that is that I like the old world, and it takes a hell of a lot to make me like something new. I'm not completely a Luddite, but not too far removed from it either. So, with this, I will bring this rather impromptu, unprepared and unexpected conversation to an end. Having criticized how she is displayed, I still like seeing her. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you ever so much for watching, commenting, and whenever I have the chance, I will answer the comments. Thank you so much.